A United Nations silence shattered by 6 words. At precisely 2:47 p.m. Eastern Time, Donald Trump abandoned his prepared UN speech and looked straight into the camera. His words were as blunt as they were shocking. London has a terrible, terrible mayor. In a chamber that has endured decades of diplomatic jousting, from Cold War denunciations to heated debates over war and sanctions, this moment was extraordinary. Leaders from 193 countries sat in stunned stillness. Pens froze, translators paused, even the cameras faltered. This was not the usual choreography of international politics. It was direct, raw, and personal. The force of Trump's accusation did not lie solely in its delivery, but in its data. He reached for his phone, breaking every protocol of UN formality, and began reading crime statistics aloud. Knife crime in London up 15%. Violent robberies rising 22%. Travel warnings from 6 separate countries advising caution in the British capital. These were not partisan talking points, he declared, but official government figures. Suddenly, the room was not listening to a politician's opinion, but to numbers impossible to ignore. What followed was a cascade of whispers and reactions. The Brazilian delegation leaned towards one another. French officials stopped scribbling notes. Even the famously disciplined German team exchanged glances. In 45 years of UN sessions, such a spectacle had never unfolded. Diplomacy thrives on restraint. This was confrontation. Back in London, Sadiq Khan's office received the news before the mayor himself. Within half an hour, his press secretary was fielding calls from every major broadcaster. Within another, social media began to churn. By 4 o'clock, Khan sat in City Hall watching the clip on loop. The problem was not just Trump's words. It was that those words were travelling faster and further than the mayor's team could manage. Khan's response was swift but defensive. He dismissed Trump's comments as racist, divisive, and unfounded. He attacked the messenger but avoided addressing the message. No counter-statistics, no reassurance, no plan. The omission was glaring. Political combatants can debate tone and motive, but facts demand reckoning. Instead, Khan leaned on outrage, hoping indignation would eclipse scrutiny. It did not. Within hours, the hashtag #CheckTheNumbers trended across Britain. And crucially, it was not driven by Trump supporters or right-wing activists. It was ordinary Londoners, checking official police and government sites. They found, to their discomfort, that many of Trump's claims were accurate. Knife crime was indeed up. Robberies were rising. Travel warnings existed. The statistics spoke with a cold clarity that no rhetoric could obscure. This was the beginning of a shift. What had started as Trump's assault on a mayor became a broader reckoning about safety, leadership, and the uncomfortable gap between political presentation and lived reality. An insult in New York became a reckoning in London. By Wednesday morning, the fallout from Trump's comments dominated British airwaves. Callers to radio programmes spoke with a reluctant honesty. "I cannot believe I am agreeing with Trump," said one teacher, "but I checked the data and he is right." This sentiment was echoed across shops, homes, and workplaces. The story was no longer about Trump. It was about Londoners confronting statistics they had overlooked or chosen to ignore. Sarah Mitchell, a 34-year-old nurse from Hackney, crystallised this unease with a viral tweet. "I hate that Trump is right about anything, but the Met Police website confirms it. 3 muggings on my street this month. When did we stop talking about this?" Her message received over 127,000 retweets within hours. It was a moment of collective dissonance. A leader they distrusted had pointed to realities they recognised. Journalists could not look away. The Times, The Telegraph, and The Guardian each ran fact checks. Their conclusions varied in tone but aligned in substance. Trump's figures were substantially correct. Yes, his delivery was political theatre. Yes, his framing served his own agenda. But the numbers could not be dismissed. Even broadcasters critical of Trump conceded the point. James O'Brien of LBC admitted live on air that the statistics were accurate, adding, "The question is not whether Trump is right. The question is why our mayor is not speaking about this." The political establishment began to squirm. On Thursday, by pure coincidence, the London Assembly released its quarterly crime report. The findings were devastating for Khan. Confidence in public safety had fallen to its lowest in a decade. 2/3 of Londoners admitted avoiding certain areas after dark. Tourist visits to central London were down by 8%. These were not Trump's numbers. They were London's own. Khan's opponents seized the moment. Susan Hall, a prominent rival, declared, "The mayor can attack Trump's personality all he wants, but he cannot attack his own data." The accusation struck home because it bypassed ideology. It was not about Trump versus Khan, right versus left. It was about Londoners feeling unsafe in their own city. Khan's counterattack was unconvincing. He questioned methodologies, he hinted at political manipulation, but such deflections appeared evasive. Even his allies grew uneasy. Labour MP David Lammy privately warned that Khan was fighting the wrong battle. Instead of facts and solutions, he was indulging in personality clashes. Against Trump, that was a contest few could win. In this atmosphere, Khan's leadership appeared diminished. The more he spoke about Trump, the less he appeared to speak about London. And that, for many, was the deepest concern. From outrage to hashtags, the tide turned online. By Friday morning, the storm had shifted decisively. Khan appeared on Good Morning Britain, choosing humour over substance. He mocked Trump, joked about living rent-free in the president's mind, and framed the exchange as petty obsession. Yet what viewers noticed was not the wit but the absence of solutions. No plan to tackle crime, no counter-statistics, no reassurance for worried residents. Within hours, the backlash exploded. The hashtag #CanOut began trending, and this time its origins were not predictable partisans. It came from Emma Thornton, a 35-year-old social worker, Labour voter and mother from Islington. Voted for Khan twice, cannot do it again. Too busy fighting Trump to fight crime. We need leadership, not Twitter wars. Her tweet drew over 340,000 likes. It was a rallying cry, not from the opposition, but from Khan's own base. Pollsters moved quickly. An emergency YouGov survey found that 41% of Londoners thought Trump's criticism was partly or wholly justified. Among Khan's own 2021 supporters, 28% agreed. These numbers were politically fatal. When more than a quarter of your own voters concede ground to your fiercest critic, the ground beneath you is crumbling. The demographics of the Khan-out wave startled analysts. It was not driven by far-right activists or disaffected conservatives. It was propelled by the very groups who had propelled Khan to power. Young professionals, ethnic minorities, working parents, graduates living in inner-city boroughs. In other words, his coalition was fragmenting from within. Media narratives shifted accordingly. Newspapers began publishing features less about Trump's provocation and more about Khan's inability to respond with authority. Commentators pointed out the gap between rhetoric and governance. Instead of unveiling initiatives, he was trading insults. Instead of offering plans, he was deflecting. Even allies struggled. Owen Jones, a columnist known for his defence of progressive politics, wrote candidly, "The mayor must stop making this about Trump and start making it about London. Trump will be gone one day. Crime statistics will remain." It was the kind of critique that revealed deep fractures inside Khan's support base. By the weekend, the issue was no longer whether Trump was right or wrong. The focus had shifted entirely. It was about leadership, credibility, and whether a city facing rising crime could trust its mayor to prioritise residents over rhetoric. The question resonated across communities, not as a partisan debate, but as a practical concern. Safety. The internet, once Khan's ally, had become his most unforgiving critic. And in the digital age, that reversal is rarely survivable. By Sunday, the spotlight had moved from Trump's theatre to Khan's silence. On BBC's Sunday Politics, presenter Laura Kurtzberg asked a simple question. Setting aside President Trump, are you satisfied with London's crime trends? Khan spoke for 4 minutes, mentioned Trump 11 times, and never answered the question. For viewers, the avoidance was glaring. For commentators, it was confirmation of a deeper problem. Political allies grew restless. Owen Jones called for a focus on Londoners' legitimate concerns. David Lammy urged colleagues privately to push Khan towards substance, yet the mayor persisted with deflection, treating the dispute as a personality contest rather than a governance test. The problem was clear. Voters were not judging his humour, they were judging their safety. The Conservative Party capitalised. Initially cautious about appearing aligned with Trump, they reframed the issue as one of Labour credibility. If Labour cannot handle scrutiny from Washington, one Conservative strategist argued, how can they handle tough decisions in Westminster? It was an argument about competence rather than ideology, and it began to resonate. More telling was the silence from Labour's leadership. Sir Keir Starmer, asked 3 times in Parliament about Trump's claims, deflected without defending Khan. To analysts, the message was unmistakable. The leadership did not view Khan's response as defensible. This absence of support spoke volumes. By Tuesday, exactly 1 week on, the story had morphed beyond Trump versus Khan. It was about whether British politicians could handle uncomfortable truths. Morning talk shows debated not the validity of Trump's statistics, but the adequacy of Khan's leadership. Approval ratings reflected the shift. Khan dropped 7 points in a single week. The Conservative challenger rose by 12. Labour's to Assembly polling sank to its lowest since 2010. For many voters, the verdict was forming. Trump's words may have been provocative, but Khan's failure to confront them was decisive. The inability to move beyond indignation left him diminished. In British politics, perception is often as powerful as performance. Khan's image as a modernising, inclusive leader was being eroded by the appearance of denial. The question now extended beyond his own career. Could Labour afford to defend a mayor whose handling of criticism undermined wider credibility? Could Londoners afford to trust a leader more focused on disputes abroad than challenges at home? The story had outgrown Trump. It had become a mirror reflecting uncomfortable questions about leadership, accountability, and political resilience in a volatile age. The heart of the story is not Trump's insult, but Khan's reaction. What began as a shocking breach of UN protocol became, within days, a test of political character. Trump's attack was sensational, but it was finite. Khan's response, however, unfolded in public over days, reinforcing every doubt his critics voiced. By refusing to address the statistics directly, he allowed numbers to speak louder than his words. Public opinion shifted rapidly. Londoners who had voted for Khan twice began to question his priorities. Safety concerns resonated more strongly than transatlantic disputes. Parents walking their children home, commuters navigating late-night journeys, tourists reconsidering their visits. These were the lived realities that cut through political spin. When asked who they trusted to address them, Khan's absence of focus became glaring. The real political damage was not in Trump's critique, but in Khan's failure to pivot. Leadership demands confrontation with uncomfortable truths. By dismissing figures as political footballs, Khan seemed to diminish residents' lived experiences. The perception that he was more engaged in sparring with a foreign leader than solving domestic problems hardened quickly. Commentators drew broader lessons. The age of social media has eroded the old defences of political spin. When citizens can access raw data within minutes, dismissals carry little weight. Hashtags amplify what officials seek to downplay. The check the numbers trend demonstrated this vividly. Ordinary residents validated Trump's claims using British government sources. In that environment, attacking the critic is futile if the facts resonate. By the close of the week, the narrative was clear. Trump had handed Khan a challenge. Khan had the opportunity to demonstrate leadership by acknowledging concerns, outlining solutions, and shifting the debate onto constructive ground. Instead, he chose confrontation without substance. The outcome was stark: falling approval, rising opposition, and wavering allies. The broader implication stretches beyond London. It asks whether leaders in democratic societies are prepared to respond to criticism with clarity, even when it comes from adversaries. It asks whether political survival depends less on silencing opponents and more on answering citizens' anxieties. For Khan, this episode may define not only his tenure, but also the expectations placed on all public officials in a transparent age. In the end, the real lesson is simple. Numbers will outlast noise.